The Texas sun blazed overhead as dust swirled around the crowded auction grounds. The annual dog auction in a small town near Dallas was a grand affair, an event that attracted the wealthiest breeders, trainers, and sportsmen from across the country. Rows of kennels lined the field, each housing the finest American foxhounds bred for hunting and racing. The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the sharp ring of auctioneers calling out bids. Men in tailored suits and cowboy hats assessed the dogs with experienced eyes, looking for the next great champion. Women, draped in expensive dresses, chatted over glasses of sweet tea while casually pointing at the hounds their families might purchase. Among the rows of eager, well-groomed pups stood a single kennel that few paid attention to. Inside, a young foxhound sat quietly, his golden brown fur glistening in the sunlight. Unlike the others, he didn't jump excitedly at the bars or wag his tail in anticipation. His deep, intelligent eyes watched the passers-by with quiet curiosity, but there was something else about him, something that made people turn away. His right front leg was shorter than the others. Breeders scoffed at the sight, whispering among themselves. "What a shame," one murmured. "Could have been a fine dog if not for that leg." "Waste of money," another said, shaking his head. One by one, the hounds were sold. The highest bidder secured the strongest, fastest-looking pups, already dreaming of trophies and winnings. But the young foxhound remained in his kennel, overlooked and unwanted. Standing on the outskirts of the crowd was 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐞 Matthews, a 17-year-old boy with dust-covered boots and a worn baseball cap shading his determined eyes. He had been working a local hunting dog farm for nearly a year, scrubbing kennels, feeding dogs, and dreaming of the day he could own one himself. Jake wasn't from a wealthy family. In fact, he had no family left except for his Aunt Maggie, who had taken him in after his parents passed away. She did her best, but money was tight, and Jake had to earn his keep. Still, every spare dollar he made, he saved, not for new clothes or gadgets, but for this moment. His gaze locked onto the small foxhound. Something about the dog reminded him of himself, overlooked, underestimated, but still holding his head high. Next up, the auctioneer's voice boomed. "We have a young male foxhound, strong, alert, and with a great lineage. Bidding starts at $500. Silence. No hands went up. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Do I hear $400? Nothing." A few murmurs spread through the crowd. One of the wealthy breeders chuckled. "He'd be lucky to fetch $50. $200? The auctioneer called, looking increasingly desperate. Jake's heart pounded. This was his chance. He quickly dug into his pocket, fingers closing around the crumpled bills he had been saving for months. He stepped forward and called out, $150. The crowd turned in surprise. A few laughed, others simply shook their heads. "You serious, kid?" a man in a Stetson hat asked, amused. Jake swallowed hard but stood his ground. "Yes, sir." The auctioneer looked at him for a moment, then shrugged. "Sold for $150 to the young man in the cap." Chuckles rippled through the audience, but Jake didn't care. He hurried forward as the kennel door opened. The foxhound hesitated at first, glancing up at his new owner. Then, as if sensing the sincerity in Jake's eyes, he took a tentative step forward and pressed his cold nose into the boy's hand. Jake smiled. "Come on, boy. Let's go home." As they walked away from the auction, whispers followed them. "Poor kid wasted his money. That dog won't last a day in a real race. What's he going to do with a crippled hound?" Jake ignored them. He knew what they didn't. This dog had something special. He just needed a chance to prove it. "Rocky," Jake whispered, giving the pup his new name. "That's what I'll call you." The foxhound looked up at him, ears perking. "Yeah," Jake said, ruffling the pup's soft fur. "Because one day, you're going to shock 'em all." And with that, the boy and his dog set off toward an uncertain but promising future. The ride back home was quiet, aside from the hum of Jake's old pickup truck. Rocky sat beside him on the torn passenger seat, staring out the window as the countryside rolled by. His ears twitched at every unfamiliar sound, the rustling of trees, the occasional honk of another car. "You'll get used to it, buddy," Jake said, glancing over with a grin. "It's not the fanciest place, but it's home." Their home was a small, one-story house on the edge of town, surrounded by acres of open fields. The land was mostly dry, but a few patches of grass and an old barn gave it a rustic charm. Aunt Maggie was already on the porch, arms crossed, watching as Jake pulled up. When he stepped out with Rocky trotting at his side, she sighed. "Tell me you didn't spend all your savings on that dog." Jake scratched the back of his head. I did." She groaned, shaking her head. "Jake, we barely have enough as it is. What are you going to do with him?" "I'm going to train him," Jake said firmly. "He's got more heart than any of those fancy dogs back at the auction." "I know it." Aunt Maggie eyed Rocky, who stood beside Jake, tail wagging slightly but ears lowered, sensing the tension. Finally, she exhaled. "Well, what's done is done. But he's your responsibility. Food, training, vet bills, you take care of it." Jake nodded. "I will." Over the next few days, Rocky adjusted to his new home. At first, he was cautious, sniffing every corner of the yard and sleeping curled up in the barn rather than inside the house. But Jake made sure he felt welcome. He built a soft bed for him in his room, fed him from his own plate when food was scarce, and spent every spare moment bonding with him. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Jake stroked Rocky's ears and whispered, "People say you'll never be a racer, but I know they're wrong." Rocky licked his hand in response. And just like that, a bold decision formed in Jake's mind. He was going to train Rocky for the biggest dog race in Texas. As the weeks passed, Rocky's stamina began to soar. Early every morning, he and Jake would jog along the dirt roads behind the house, sometimes covering several miles before breakfast. Neighbors occasionally peeked out from behind their curtains, puzzled by the sight of a lanky teenage boy running with a foxhound that had an uneven gait. But Jake didn't mind the stares. He focused on strengthening Rocky's muscles, helping him adapt to his shorter leg. One Saturday afternoon, while Jake was brushing Rocky down after a run, he noticed a figure approaching from across the yard. A tall girl with braids and a friendly smile raised a hand in greeting. "Hey there," she called. "Name's Natalie. You must be Jake." Jake nodded. "That's right. You live around here." "My family just moved in a few weeks ago," she said, pointing toward a small house across the street. "I see you and your dog running every morning." Her gaze flicked to Rocky, and her smile broadened. "He's beautiful. What's his name?" "Rocky," Jake said proudly. "Not everyone thinks he's special, but I do." She crouched down, letting Rocky sniff her hand. He wagged his tail in approval. "Well, I think he's great," she said, giving him a gentle pat. "I love dogs. Used to volunteer at a shelter back in Houston. Mind if I hang around? Maybe I could help sometime." Jake hesitated for a moment. He wasn't used to people taking an interest in Rocky, let alone offering help. But something about Natalie's genuine smile and easygoing manner put him at ease. "Sure," he said, returning the smile. "Could use someone to keep track of his times when we do sprints." From that day on, Natalie became a regular at the makeshift training sessions. She brought a stopwatch, made notes in a little notebook, and offered suggestions on improving Rocky's stride. She even showed Jake a few massage techniques she'd learned at the shelter for dogs recovering from injuries. "See how he favors his left front leg?" Natalie explained one evening, lightly running her hands over Rocky's joints. "We can help ease some of that strain." Jake was grateful for her help. With Natalie timing their runs and carefully monitoring Rocky's progress, the dog's performance improved at a faster rate. Soon, Rocky was comfortably trotting long distances, and though his stride was still off kilter, he moved with a surprising grace and determination. "You know," Jake said one day as they took a break near an old oak tree, "he's getting pretty good. Maybe we should enter him in the Lone Star Dog Derby. It's coming up in a couple of months, down in Austin." Natalie's eyes lit up. "That's the biggest race in the state, right?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, it's where the best hounds and greyhounds come to race. If Rocky can even place, it would prove everyone wrong about him." She grinned. "Then let's do it." But as the old saying goes, every silver lining has a cloud. Word had begun to spread around town that Jake intended to enter his crippled dog in the Lone Star Dog Derby. Most folks reacted with polite skepticism, but not everyone. One afternoon, while Jake and Natalie were training Rocky in a nearby field, a shiny black pickup truck rumbled up to them. A tall man in expensive boots and a cowboy hat stepped out, followed by a sleek greyhound on a leash. "Heard there's a boy around here thinking of racing some lame foxhound in Austin," he drawled, eyes narrowing at Rocky. Jake bristled. "Who wants to know?" The man tipped his hat with a mocking grin. "Name's Trevor Brooks. I run the Brookside Kennels, top racing dogs in the state. This here's Storm. She's the fastest greyhound you'll ever see." Storm was an impressive sight, long-legged and muscular, her dark coat shimmering in the afternoon sun. She eyed Rocky with aloof indifference, as though sensing he was no match for her. "So," Trevor continued, crossing his arms, "I hear you're planning to bring this misfit to the Derby. Hate to break it to you, son, but you'll just embarrass yourself." Natalie set her jaw. "Rocky's not a misfit. He's training hard, and he'll do just fine." Trevor barely spared her a glance. "Young lady, you don't understand how these things go. It's all about pedigree and performance. A dog with a bum leg ain't got a chance." Jake clenched his fists, fighting back the urge to snap at the man. Instead, he spoke calmly, "We'll see about that at the Derby." Trevor let out a short laugh. "Sure thing, kid. But don't say I didn't warn you when your little hound can't even make it halfway." He gave a curt nod, then whistled for Storm to hop back into the truck. With a roar of the engine, they sped off, leaving a trail of dust swirling behind. Natalie placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You okay?" He exhaled slowly. "Yeah, just more fuel for the fire, I guess." Rocky looked up at them, head tilted. Jake knelt down, ruffling the dog's ears. "Don't listen to him, buddy. We're going to show him what we can do." As the truck's dust settled, an unspoken determination filled the air. With Natalie's support, Jake was more certain than ever. Rocky wouldn't just enter that race. He'd give the so-called elite kennels a run for their money. Tension hummed in the early morning air as Jake and Rocky prepared for their daily run. It had been 2 weeks since Trevor Brooks showed up with his sleek greyhound, Storm, and the encounter still played in Jake's mind. On one hand, it fired him up, pushing him to train Rocky even harder. On the other, it nagged at his deepest insecurities. What if Trevor was right? What if Rocky couldn't handle the intense pressure of a real dog race? Jake pushed those worries aside as he stood at the makeshift starting line, a strip of spray-painted grass in the backyard. Natalie, wearing a baseball cap and holding a stopwatch, gave him a thumbs up. "Ready when you are." Crouching beside Rocky, Jake patted the dog's flank. "All right, buddy. Let's see some speed." With a snap of the leash, Rocky took off. His gait was still uneven. His right front leg, shorter than the left, caused a slight tilt whenever he accelerated. But day by day, he seemed to compensate more naturally. His back legs drove him forward with real power, and he was beginning to pick up impressive bursts of speed. Jake sprinted alongside him for the first few yards, then let Rocky surge ahead. Behind them, Natalie called out lap times, her voice echoing across the yard. "Faster than yesterday. You've shaved off a full second." When Rocky slowed to a trot, panting heavily, Jake knelt down to offer water from a plastic bowl. The dog lapped it up gratefully. Natalie jogged over, waving the stopwatch. "He's improving, but we've got to increase his endurance." Jake nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "We should try longer distances. Maybe run down to the old creek and back." Their plan for the day set. They headed down a dirt path that wound behind the farm, eventually leading to a shallow creek shaded by pecan trees. The midday sun scorched their backs, and the dust kicked up by their sneakers made breathing difficult, but Rocky kept pace, determined to prove himself. Passing each fence post became a mini-goal, another small victory. They finally reached the creek, where Rocky gulped fresh water and flopped onto the grass, paws splayed in contentment. Jake and Natalie collapsed nearby, catching their breath. "I swear," Natalie gasped, "he's getting better every day." But the Derby, it's not just about speed. Those races can be brutal. Other dogs might bump into him or try to edge him out. He needs to be ready for that, too. Jake gazed at Rocky, who was now rolling on his back, tongue lolling. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that. We might need to practice with obstacles or distractions, so he's not caught off guard." He trailed off, recalling the sneer on Trevor's face. Could Rocky really hold his own against a dog like Storm? Later that afternoon, they set up a new training routine. Natalie gathered random objects, cardboard boxes, lawn chairs, even an old scarecrow, and arranged them in the yard to simulate a crowded track. Jake ran beside Rocky, steering him around the makeshift obstacles. At first, Rocky balked, nearly tripping over a tipped-over chair. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, keeping a hand on the dog's collar to guide him. "We'll get the hang of it." On their second attempt, Rocky navigated more smoothly, though he still bumped into the scarecrow's arm. By the third run-through, he managed to weave around everything without hesitation, tail wagging as if proud of himself. The scent of Aunt Maggie's cooking drifted through the open window, reminding them it was past lunchtime. Panting and covered in a fine layer of dust, they flopped onto the grass. Natalie giggled. "We're almost as dirty as Rocky now." Jake grinned, glancing down at his dirt-smudged jeans. "Hard work's never pretty, I guess, but it's paying off." A moment of comfortable silence passed, then Natalie spoke quietly. "Jake, do you ever worry that maybe this is too big a dream?" He turned to her, noticing the concern etched on her face. "Sometimes, but I can't shake the feeling that Rocky and I have something to prove, you know? That we're not just a couple of underdogs people can laugh at." Natalie nodded. "Exactly. It's just, Trevor and his fancy kennel aren't the only ones who will be competing. You got trainers from all over the state, maybe even out of state, coming to Austin. They've got money, sponsors, top-tier vet care." Jake looked away for a moment, heart pounding. "I know, but that doesn't mean we can't try." She put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're right, and you're not alone in this. We'll keep pushing together." That evening, after Natalie left, Jake found himself in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay while Rocky dozed at his feet. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photo of himself as a young kid, perched on his dad's lap while petting a dog. That dog had been an ordinary mutt, but it never failed to greet him every morning with boundless energy and love. "I wish you were here, Dad," Jake whispered, running a thumb over the faded image. "You'd know just what to say." Rocky stirred, lifting his head to rest it on Jake's knee. The dog's warm, trusting gaze seemed to offer silent encouragement. Jake smiled softly, tucking the photo away. "Guess we'll just have to figure out ourselves, huh?" he murmured, scratching behind Rocky's ear. Outside, the Texas night sky stretched endlessly, stars shimmering in the velvety darkness. One by one, the lights in neighboring houses blinked out as the town drifted off to sleep. Yet Jake's mind refused to settle. Despite the steady progress, a small voice in the back of his head kept asking the same question. What if we're not good enough? He closed his eyes, determined to silence that doubt with relentless training, unwavering determination, and maybe a little faith. Because for Jake and Rocky, there was no turning back now. They had something to prove, and come the day of the Lone Star Dog Derby, they intended to prove it. Over the next few weeks, life fell into a steady rhythm. Every dawn found Jake and Rocky pounding the trails behind the house, pushing the limits of speed and stamina. After breakfast, and sometimes an argument with Aunt Maggie about chores, Jake would meet Natalie in the backyard to run drills. Afternoons were reserved for chores around the farm, but evenings meant more training. Obstacle courses, sprints, and even sessions where Natalie played sound clips of barking dogs and roaring crowds to acclimate Rocky to the chaos of a real race. Despite the grind, Jake felt a cautious optimism growing within him. Rocky was improving, no question. The dog's uneven gait had become less noticeable. He now bounded forward with near-effortless grace. Even Aunt Maggie, who rarely commented on the training, had remarked, "That dog sure is coming along, Jake." But the closer they got to the race, the heavier the weight of expectation became. One humid morning, trouble finally struck. "Rise and shine," Jake called softly as he peeked into the barn. Rocky stirred on his makeshift bed of blankets, yawning. Usually the dog would leap up, tail wagging, ready to go. Today, he stood more slowly, favoring his shorter leg. Jake frowned. "You all right, buddy?" Rocky tried to take a step but let out a faint whimper, lifting his paw off the ground. Alarmed, Jake knelt beside him, running his hands gently over the dog's shoulder and foreleg. "Doesn't look swollen," Jake murmured, pressing lightly. Rocky flinched, and Jake's stomach clenched with worry. "Okay, easy. Did you twist it?" Natalie arrived a few minutes later, stopwatch in hand. She spotted Jake examining Rocky's leg and rushed over. "What happened?" "I'm not sure," Jake replied, grimacing. "He can barely put weight on his shorter leg. I don't see any cuts or swelling, though." Natalie pursed her lips. "He could have strained a muscle. With the way he compensates, it's easy to overdo it. I guess we should take him to the vet." A tense hour later, they sat in a cramped waiting room at the local veterinary clinic. The walls were plastered with posters of smiling dogs, cats, and the occasional exotic pet. The smell of antiseptic and nervous animals filled the air. Jake's knee bounced anxiously, and Natalie rested a hand on his arm. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it," she whispered. A tall, bespectacled vet named Dr. Flores finally called them in. After a thorough exam, she straightened up and let out a soft sigh. "It's a mild ligament strain," Dr. Flores said, pointing to a spot on an x-ray chart. "It's not severe, but given Rocky's shorter leg, it places additional stress on his other joints. You'll need to let him rest for at least a week. No strenuous running or jumping." Jake felt his heart plummet. "But the race is in less than a month." Dr. Flores gave him a sympathetic look. "I know that's tough timing, but if you push him now, you risk a more serious injury that could sideline him for good." She handed Jake a list of instructions: ice packs, gentle walks on soft ground, and anti-inflammatory meds. "Follow these guidelines and come back in a week. If all's well, we can start easing him back into training." Back at the farm, Jake set up a comfortable spot for Rocky in the living room, far from the barn's dusty floor. Aunt Maggie hovered nearby, concern etched into her features. "I can't say I'm surprised," she said quietly. "That dog's got heart, but his body's got limits." Jake bristled at her words, though he knew she didn't mean to be harsh. "We'll get him back on track, Aunt Maggie. You'll see." Still, the week of forced rest felt like an eternity. While Rocky lounged indoors, growing restless by the day, Jake found himself wrestling with guilt. Had he pushed Rocky too hard, too fast? Was he so focused on proving Trevor Brooks wrong that he hadn't noticed the warning signs? Natalie continued to visit, helping Jake keep Rocky comfortable. She brought puzzle toys to keep the dog mentally engaged and even attempted some light massage techniques to speed his recovery. Through it all, Rocky remained stoic, occasionally letting out a short, frustrated bark when he heard other dogs outside. Near the end of the week, Jake got an unexpected call from Mr. Jordan, the owner of the local hunting dog farm where he used to work part-time. "Jake, I heard you're training for the Lone Star Derby," Mr. Jordan said, his deep voice crackling over the phone. "Look, I've got a proposition. There's a small local race happening this weekend. Just a friendly event at the county fair. Might be a good way to test Rocky's readiness without the pressure of a big crowd." Jake bit his lip. "Rocky's been injured, Mr. Jordan. We were told to rest him." "Understood. But this one's a short track, no big obstacles. You could see how he does at half speed, maybe just to gauge his condition. Some of the smaller time racers will be there, too." Jake cast a glance at Rocky, curled up on the couch. The dog's eyes were alert, ears perking at the sound of Jake's voice. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately to prove they were still in the game. But Dr. Flores's warning echoed in his mind. "Push him now, and you risk a more serious injury." "Let me think about it," Jake said finally. After the call, he relayed the conversation to Natalie, who dropped by with fresh bandages. She frowned. "You heard the vet. If he's not fully healed, racing him, even a small race, could be risky." "I know," Jake mumbled, "but maybe a light run would help us see if he's okay." She set a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Jake, you said you'd do anything for Rocky. Right now, the best thing might be letting him rest. The Lone Star Derby is the real goal, remember?" Jake sighed heavily, sinking onto the couch next to Rocky. The dog nestled his head in Jake's lap, as if sensing the gravity of the decision. "Yeah, you're right." He picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Jordan back. "Thank you for the offer, sir, but we're going to sit this one out." The following days were both frustrating and oddly reassuring. Frustrating, because Jake's eagerness to train had to be bottled up, replaced by slow walks around the yard and careful monitoring of Rocky's leg. Reassuring, because day by day, Rocky showed signs of improvement. His limp lessened, and the spark in his eyes returned. At the end of the week, they revisited Dr. Flores. She examined Rocky with an approving nod. Looks much better. You can start light runs, but keep them short. If all goes well, you might still make the derby. Just be cautious. Stepping out of the clinic, Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. Natalie handed him a slip of paper with new training schedules, incremental increases in distance and speed, frequent checkups, and plenty of rest days. "We'll do this right," she said firmly. "No shortcuts." Jake scratched Rocky's ears as the dog nosed at his hand. "Ready to try again, buddy?" Rocky gave a small bark, as if to say, absolutely. Despite the setback, Jake felt more determined than ever. If anything, this bump in the road had taught him that pushing too hard could break you. But with patience, care, and a little luck, you could come back stronger than before. With only a few weeks left until the Lone Star Dog Derby, every step counted. And as Rocky limped out of the clinic with renewed energy, Jake couldn't help believing that, injury or not, their dream was still within reach. True to Dr. Flores' advice, Jake and Natalie eased Rocky back into his routine with caution. At first, they kept him on short jogs around the yard, a far cry from the fast-paced sprints he'd done before. Still, Rocky seemed grateful just to be moving again. His tail wagged, and that familiar spark of determination shone in his eyes. Jake remained vigilant, carefully watching for any sign of discomfort. If Rocky's gait faltered, or if he so much as whimpered, they cut the session short. Natalie maintained a meticulous journal of distances, times, and rest days, adjusting their schedule day by day. One warm afternoon, they decided to push the boundaries just a bit, taking Rocky on a half-mile run down the dirt road behind the house. "Easy does it," Natalie reminded him, stopwatch in hand. Jake nodded. "Got it. Steady pace, no sprinting yet." Rocky took off at a calm trot, occasionally glancing back as if to check that Jake was still there. Sunlight glinted off the dog's coat, and with every stride, Jake felt a renewed sense of hope. His injury might have slowed him down, but it hadn't robbed him of his spirit. They finished the half-mile run without incident. By the end, Rocky's breath came in rhythmic pants, and no limp marred his stride. Jake crouched down, grinning. "How'd we do?" Natalie glanced at the stopwatch. "A bit slower than your best time, but considering everything, pretty darn good." Rocky wagged his tail, tongue lolling in a wide doggy grin. It felt like a victory. As if on cue, a breeze rustled the pecan trees, carrying the distant hum of an approaching vehicle. A moment later, a battered old pickup truck rumbled past, stirring up clouds of dust. Jake recognized it as belonging to Mr. Jordan. The truck slowed, then stopped. Mr. Jordan leaned out the window, tipping his straw hat. "How's that leg doing, Rocky?" he called. "Looks like he's back on his feet." Jake waved. "Yeah, we're taking it slow, but he's getting there." "Glad to hear it," Mr. Jordan said, his kind, weathered face splitting into a grin. "You be sure to let me know if you change your mind about these small local races. They're good practice." Jake nodded politely, though he already knew they had to be cautious. "Will do, sir." "Thanks." With a friendly wave, Mr. Jordan drove off, leaving Jake and Natalie alone on the empty road again. She slipped the stopwatch in her pocket, eyes thoughtful. "You know," she said softly, "the Lone Star Dog Derby is only 3 weeks away. We've lost almost 2 weeks of intense training." Jake's shoulders sagged slightly. "I know, we'll never be as fast as Storm or the top greyhounds. But maybe we don't have to be." He scratched Rocky behind the ears, and the dog leaned into his touch. Rocky's strength has never been raw speed. It's heart, resilience. I'm hoping that's enough to at least get us across the finish line. Natalie offered a small smile. "I believe in you, in both of you, but we should set realistic goals. Maybe focus on finishing strong, rather than placing in the top 3. Jake's expression hardened with determination. "That's what everyone expects. A decent effort, maybe a mid-pack finish, if we're lucky. But I have to try for more. We've come this far. Trevor Brooks, and everyone else, thinks Rocky's a lost cause. I want to prove them wrong." She studied his face, then nodded. "All right, let's at least do everything we can to prepare him. We'll increase the distance a bit more each day, keep an eye on his leg, and work on short sprints at the end of each session. Jake agreed, relief washing over him that Natalie was still on board, despite the risks. Together, they started the slow walk back to the house, Rocky content to trot between them. That evening, while Aunt Maggie busied herself in the kitchen, Jake sat at the dining table, reviewing notes from their training journal. Dates, distances, times, each scribbled entry told a piece of Rocky's journey. Suddenly, Aunt Maggie cleared her throat. "Jake." He looked up. She rarely initiated conversations about Rocky, and her serious tone made him set the notebook aside. "Yeah." She dried her hands on a dish towel, then turned to face him. "I've been thinking, maybe I was too hard on you about this whole race. I know it's important to you, and I see how much that dog means to you." Jake felt a flicker of surprise and gratitude. "It's okay, Aunt Maggie. I get that it's a big gamble." She nodded. "It is, but you've shown responsibility. You've taken good care of Rocky. I just wanted to say that, well, I'm proud of you, Jake, for not giving up on him, even when it got tough." Warmth spread through Jake's chest. He stood and gave his aunt a quick hug. It wasn't something they did often. "Thanks. Really." She patted his back awkwardly before stepping away. "Don't go thinking this means I approve of all your ideas," she said, attempting a stern note. "But if you need anything, vet bills or whatever, you just let me know." Jake smiled. "Thanks, Aunt Maggie. I appreciate that." Over the next 10 days, Jake and Natalie followed a strict regimen. Early mornings were for distance running. Careful, steady runs that gradually increased in length. Rocky's leg held up with only minor signs of fatigue. Afternoons involved rest, stretching, and gentle walks. Evenings were short sprint drills, focusing on building explosive power without overtaxing Rocky's joints. Bit by bit, Jake could see Rocky regaining his confidence. The dog no longer hesitated when faced with obstacles, and his stamina climbed closer to where it had been before the injury. Still, a nagging doubt lingered in Jake's mind. Would it be enough in time for the Derby? A few days before the race, they decided to run a full mile at a moderate pace. Nothing too extreme, just a test of Rocky's endurance. Natalie stood at the start line with her stopwatch, anxiety evident in her eyes. Jake gave her a reassuring nod. "Don't worry, we'll keep it smooth. No heroics." Rocky sniffed the air, tail wagging in anticipation. At Natalie's signal, they set off. The first quarter mile went smoothly, Rocky's gait even and unforced. Jake settled into a comfortable rhythm, relieved that his dog showed no signs of strain. By the halfway mark, though, he noticed Rocky favoring his shorter leg just a bit. Nothing drastic, but enough to make Jake's heart pound faster. "Easy boy," he murmured. "Almost there." They pressed on, completing the mile in just under 6 minutes. Panting hard, Rocky plopped onto the grass. Natalie rushed over with water and an encouraging smile. "How's he doing?" she asked, eyes flicking nervously between Jake and Rocky. Jake knelt down, gently checking Rocky's shoulder and paw. The dog licked his hand, gaze bright and alert. "He's okay," Jake said, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A bit tired, but no limping. Relief flooded Natalie's features. "That's good news. Really good." Yet beneath her relief, Jake could sense the same unspoken question he was asking himself. Would Rocky's okay be anywhere near good enough when racing the fastest dogs in Texas? That weekend, the day they'd been anticipating and dreading, finally arrived. Austin's fairgrounds bustled with energy, flags flapping in the breeze, vendors selling everything from hot dogs to cowboy hats. The Lone Star Dog Derby was more than just a race. It was a grand spectacle that drew families, tourists, and professional dog trainers alike. Rows of motorhomes and sleek trailers filled the parking lot, each carrying prize canines from across the state. Jake's stomach churned with nervous excitement as he pulled into a dusty spot near the back, parking his old pickup next to rows of gleaming, high-end vehicles. Aunt Maggie had opted to stay behind, but Natalie was there, her presence a steady anchor. They unloaded Rocky, who sniffed the air, ears perked. He seemed calm, though a slight tremor of anticipation ran through his body. "We made it," Jake whispered, patting Rocky's side. "Now we just have to prove we belong here." The fairground sprawled ahead of them, a maze of concession stands, sponsor booths, and a large oval track for the main event. Over loudspeakers, an announcer rattled off the schedule of races, inviting attendees to place bets on their favorites. Jake saw sleek greyhounds, muscular pit mixes, and various other hounds parading around. Each looked well-trained, their coats glossy, owners decked out in professional gear. By comparison, Jake felt distinctly out of place in his worn jeans and dusty boots. But Rocky stood tall, his golden brown fur shining under the Texas sun, no trace of the limp that had plagued him weeks before. Something about his quiet confidence set him apart from the showy, restless energy of other dogs. Natalie handed Jake the official registration papers. "We have to sign in at the admin tent. They'll want Rocky's vet clearance, so we'll show them Dr. Flores's note." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Right, let's do it." They headed for the long line of trainers and dog owners waiting to finalize their entries. Heart hammering, Jake wondered if Trevor Brooks would be among them. The memory of Storm's sleek form flashed through his mind. No matter how far Rocky had come, Storm was on another level entirely. Shaking off the doubt, Jake reminded himself of their plan. Run steady, avoid jostling, and rely on Rocky's endurance. If nothing else, they'd finish with heads held high. As they approached the admin table, an official looked over Rocky appraisingly. "Name?" Jake cleared his throat. "Jacob Matthews. My dog's name is Rocky. Breed, American Foxhound." The official glanced up from her paperwork, gaze zeroing in on Rocky's shorter leg. She masked any judgment with a polite nod. "You'll be in the second qualifying heat this afternoon. Good luck." "Thanks," Jake muttered, shoulders tight. They stepped away, scanning the grounds for a quiet spot to wait for the race. Jake's nerves buzzed with the realization that they had only hours before Rocky's test on the track. Natalie gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "you've done so much more than anyone thought possible." Jake managed a small smile, crouching to scratch Rocky's chin. "You hear that, boy? We're about to walk into the biggest challenge of our lives." Rocky simply blinked those steady brown eyes, as if to say, "I'm ready." In the background, cheers erupted as the first set of hounds took off around the oval track. Dust rose under their pounding paws, and Jake felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they'd trained for. He only hoped that all their careful preparation, all their heart, would be enough to carry them across that finish line. Jake's heart thundered in his chest as he led Rocky through the bustling fairgrounds toward the oval track. Overhead, colorful banners snapped in the breeze, and the sweet, smoky scent of funnel cakes and barbecue drifted through the air. Crowds pressed in from all sides, families chattering and cheering, vendors hawking cold drinks, gamblers comparing notes on the fastest dogs. It was overwhelming, and Jake tried not to let it show. He gripped Rocky's leash firmly, pausing every few steps so Natalie could hand them water or clear a path. The dog stayed close, ears perked and eyes bright, alert but not afraid. After everything they'd been through, Jake was thankful that Rocky seemed calm, no trace of panic or limping. They finally arrived at a fenced-off section near the starting line, designated for the next group of competitors. Rows of anxious owners stood with their hounds, greyhounds, whippets, and other lean racing breeds. A few turned to give Rocky a cursory glance, noticing his slightly mismatched legs, but most quickly looked away, already convinced he wasn't a threat. "Registration cards, please," a stern-faced official said, stepping up. She wore a logoed polo shirt and carried a clipboard. Jake produced the paperwork. "Jacob Matthews. This is Rocky. We're in the second heat." The official ran her pen down the list, then gave a brisk nod. "Heat 2, positions 14 through 26. You're in position 23. Wait for your number to be called, then enter the track through that gate." She pointed to a chain-link entrance where a small group of handlers already stood. Jake offered a polite "thank you" and guided Rocky into a shady corner, hoping for a moment of peace before the race began. Natalie followed, scanning the area with watchful eyes. "Any sign of Trevor?" she asked quietly. Jake glanced around. He spotted a sleek greyhound with a black coat that reminded him of Storm, But upon closer inspection, it wasn't her. "Not yet," he said. "Maybe he's in a different heat, or maybe he's already run." Natalie shrugged. "Could be. Come on, let's check Rocky's collar and harness one more time." She knelt to inspect the gear, making sure everything fit snugly, but not too tight. Jake patted Rocky's shoulder. The dog tilted his head, brown eyes focused on his owner, as though sensing the mounting tension. A muffled voice boomed from the loudspeaker. "Second heat contestants, please approach the track entrance." Second heat contestants. Jake felt his pulse quicken. "That's us," he whispered. They stepped forward, joining a line of owners funneling through the chain-link gate. A uniformed attendant handed Jake a small bib with a number 23 printed in bold, along with a matching vest for Rocky. It was bright orange, almost comical against Rocky's russet coat. Jake adjusted it carefully over the dog's torso, mindful of the shorter leg. The track itself was a wide oval, encircled by stands that were about half full. Still, the scattered cheers and murmurs felt deafening. Officials directed the dogs and their owners to a grassy infield area, separated from the packed dirt track by a low rail. Natalie peeled off, waving encouragingly. "I'll find a spot in the stands to watch. Good luck." Jake nodded, a swirl of gratitude and nerves in his gut. "Thanks. See you soon." An announcer's voice crackled over the speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second qualifying heat of the Lone Star Dog Derby. We have some fine contenders in this group. Let's give them a round of applause." A smattering of cheers rose from the stands. The attendant motioned for the owners to bring their dogs into individual boxes at the starting line, a series of low, open front stalls where the animals would wait until the signal. Jake led Rocky to stall number 23. It was cramped, the walls barely high enough to contain a racing hound. He swallowed hard, remembering the hours they'd spent trying to acclimate Rocky to loud noises and tight spaces. Would it be enough? "All right, buddy," he murmured, crouching beside the dog. "Remember our plan. Steady start, don't get trampled. Then find your rhythm." Rocky let out a soft whine, but his body trembled with anticipation rather than fear. Jake offered one last pat on the flank, then ducked out of the stall. A handler locked the small gate behind him. "All owners clear the track," an official barked. Jake jogged to the inside rail, heart pounding as he joined the other owners. From there, he spotted Natalie in the stands, leaning forward, hands clasped tight. She caught his gaze and gave a thumbs up. The announcer's voice rang out again. "And they're in the boxes. In a moment, our track marshal will lift the gates, and the hounds will set off. Who will earn a spot in tomorrow's final?" Jake wiped clammy palms on his jeans. Tomorrow's final. That meant only the top few finishers from each heat would advance. He had no illusions of beating every dog here, but if Rocky could squeeze into one of the top positions, they'd keep their dream alive. A hush fell over the stands. The track marshal raised a small flag, scanning the line of boxes to ensure all dogs were secure and ready. Then he pulled a lever. With a clatter, the gate front swung open. A cacophony of barking and yelping erupted as the dogs burst onto the track in a blur of fur and flying dust. Jake's breath caught. Rocky lunged forward with surprising speed, though he wasn't the first out of the gate. A sleek tan greyhound had taken the early lead, with a mottled whippet close behind. Rocky found himself somewhere in the middle of the pack, jostling shoulders with another foxhound. "Come on, Rock," Jake yelled, voice hoarse with excitement. "Find your lane." The swirling chaos of paws and tails made it hard for the dogs to maintain perfect form. Rocky stumbled slightly as an excitable pit mix cut him off, but he recovered quickly, maintaining a steady pace. All the training to dodge obstacles seemed to pay off. He weaved around a tumbling pair of dogs without losing too much ground. By the first turn, half the field was already pulling ahead. Jake leaned over the rail, every muscle in his body tensed. He saw Rocky near the inside edge, riding a narrower arc to the curve. It was a risky move, but it gained him a few precious yards. The crowd's roar swelled as the dogs thundered down the backstretch. The leaders were a good distance ahead, but Rocky wasn't dropping behind. Jake clenched his fists, urging his dog onward with every fiber of his being. Coming into the final turn, Rocky was still mid-pack, 7th or 8th place at best. Jake's heart pounded. They had maybe 200 yards left to make a move. "You could do this, buddy. Show them what you've got." As if he'd heard, Rocky surged. His shorter leg still caused a slight wobble, but his back legs drove with fierce power, pushing him forward. He darted between two tiring greyhounds, using the inside rail to save ground. A gasp rose from the crowd. Jake realized the front runners were now in sight. Could Rocky catch them? He didn't have the raw top speed of a purebred greyhound, but he had stamina and heart. If even a couple of them slowed, he might place. 50 yards to go, and the tan greyhound still led, with a mottled whippet on her tail. A black and white hound came in third, while Rocky challenged for fourth, neck and neck with a large pit mix. Jake shouted himself hoarse, "Go, Rocky, go!" Rocky dug in. The pit mix flagged, losing steam as they closed in on the finish line. For a moment, it looked as though Rocky might overtake the black and white hound, too, but the distance was too short. They crossed the line in a flurry of dust and pounding paws. Jake strained to see who landed where, heart hammering against his ribs. The top 3 dogs were easy to spot. After that, it was a tight cluster. An official with a notepad and binoculars stepped onto the track, signaling for calm. Handlers rushed forward to collect their winded dogs. Jake vaulted the rail, nearly tripping in his haste. "Rocky," he called. The dog trotted over, sides heaving but eyes bright. Jake knelt, fumbling for the water bottle. He didn't even care that his jeans got caked in dust. "You were amazing, buddy." Other owners milled around, some congratulating each other, others cursing under their breath. The black and white hound's handler patted her dog's flank with pride, evidently confident in a top 3 finish. Jake's gaze darted around for the results board, but it was still blank. Natalie sprinted up, breathless. "That was incredible," she panted, handing Jake a spare towel. "I think he might have gotten 4th or 5th. Hard to tell from my angle." A microphone crackled. Results for Heat 2 are now being posted. Top 5 finishers advance to the final. "Thank you for your patience, folks." Jake's stomach flipped. Top 5. That was their ticket to tomorrow's race and a shot at glory. He and Natalie hurried over to a small electronic screen set near the announcer's booth. Numbers rolled for a moment before settling. 18 tan greyhound, 21 mottled whippet, 12 black and white hound, 23 Rocky, 5 pit mix. Jake's breath whooshed out in a mixture of relief and disbelief. 4th, he whispered. Natalie let out a whoop of joy, throwing her arms around Jake in an impulsive hug. "You did it. You're in the final." Rocky wagged his tail, looking from one human to the other, seemingly pleased by their excitement. Jake stroked the dog's head, a spreading through him. They'd come here hoping just to prove they belonged, and they'd made it to the final. But even as exhilaration coursed through him, Jake couldn't help remembering that tomorrow's race would bring the best of the best together in one showdown. Trevor Brooks would likely be among them, with Storm. And those top 3 dogs who'd outpaced Rocky just now, they weren't going to slow down. Still, for this moment, he let himself revel in the victory. "We did it, boy," he said, voice thick with emotion. "We really did. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it the ultimate test. But today, Rocky, once deemed a misfit, had proven he could run with the pack. And Jake had never been more proud. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when Jake woke to a chorus of birds beyond the thin motel curtains. They decided not to drive back home, opting instead for a cheap motel in Austin so Rocky could rest. As Jake rubbed the sleep from his eyes, the events of the previous day flashed through his mind. 4th place, good enough to qualify for the biggest race of their lives. He glanced down at the floor, where Rocky lay sprawled on a blanket. One of his ears twitched in dream, and Jake smiled softly. "We did it, bud," he murmured, voice hushed so as not to wake Natalie in the next room. "We actually made it." But now came the real test, the Lone Star Dog Derby final. His chest tightened at the thought. The best of the best would be racing today. Everyone who'd placed in the top 5 of each heat. Dozens of skilled dogs, all vying for the title of champion. Jake rose carefully and pulled on a fresh shirt and jeans, stepping into the motel's small kitchenette. Natalie was already there, sipping coffee. She looked up, exhaustion in her eyes but a determined smile on her lips. "Morning," she said quietly. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Jake admitted, "but excited too. We've come this far. No point turning back now." She nodded. "I've got some energy bars and water ready. Figured we shouldn't stuff ourselves before the race." "Is Rocky up?" "He's still snoozing," Jake replied. "He deserves the rest." They ate a light breakfast, quietly discussing strategy. Natalie insisted that Jake keep Rocky's pace steady at the start, just like in the qualifier. "No point burning out early," she said. Jake agreed, though he knew that with so many elite dogs, they'd need every advantage. Still, Rocky's strength lay in his endurance and in his ability to navigate chaos. If the pack got bunched up, maybe they could slip through just like last time. By the time they finished packing and loaded up the truck, Rocky was awake and stretching. Jake gave him a gentle once-over, checking for any soreness in his shorter leg. The dog licked Jake's hand, eyes alert and eager, as though he could sense the day's importance. "Let's go, boy," Jake whispered. "We've got a date with Destiny." Back at the fairgrounds, the atmosphere was noticeably more electric. It was finals day, and spectators had turned out in greater numbers. The stands buzzed with excitement, the air thick with the scent of fried food, sunscreen, and anticipation. Vendors hawked commemorative T-shirts and programs featuring the names of the top dogs. Jake parked next to the same spot as before, and he and Natalie guided Rocky toward the infield area. A parade of cameras and reporters moved among the owners. Clearly, the final was a bigger deal than the qualifiers. Jake tried to avoid their attention, but a young reporter caught sight of Rocky's vest and hurried over. "Your competitor number 23, right? The foxhound with the shorter leg?" she asked, microphone extended. "How does it feel to have made the final?" Jake blinked, thrown off guard by her directness. It's incredible. We're just grateful to be here." The reporter smiled, turning the mic toward Rocky. "He looks determined. Any secrets to your training regimen?" Jake shrugged, patting Rocky's shoulder. "A lot of hard work and heart." The reporter nodded, stepping away to interview another contestant. Natalie exhaled, rolling her eyes good-naturedly. "Looks like you're famous, Jake." He laughed nervously. "Don't jinx it." They continued to the check-in booth, handing over Rocky's vet papers once again. An official scanned a list and gave them instructions. "Final starts in an hour. You're in box 12 this time. Good luck." Jake thanked him, then led Rocky to a quieter corner near the track's entrance. He could see other finalists warming up their dogs, some jogging in circles, others doing quick sprints to get the blood flowing. Tension radiated from everyone. A flash of black caught his eye. His heart sank as he recognized Trevor Brooks and Storm. The tall man bent low, adjusting Storm's racing vest with practiced ease. Storm stood perfectly still, exuding confidence. Natalie followed Jake's gaze. "Guess we shouldn't be surprised," she murmured. "They're one of the top kennels in state." As if sensing their attention, Trevor straightened and locked eyes with Jake. A slow, smug grin spread across his face. With a deliberate gesture, he patted Storm's flank, then gave Jake a mocking salute. Jake felt his stomach clench. He turned back to Rocky, forcing himself to focus on the dog. "Ignore him. We've got a job to do." Minutes ticked by in a blur. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, running through a list of sponsors and introducing each finalist. Thunderous applause and cheers greeted every name. And in box 12, we have Rocky, an American foxhound handled by Jacob Matthews. A ripple of curiosity swept through the crowd. Some recognized Rocky from yesterday's underdog performance. A smattering of applause followed. Jake steadied his nerves, leading Rocky to the starting boxes. The air thrummed with energy. The track felt both imposing and full of possibility. "Steady, boy," Jake whispered. "We do this our way." He left Rocky in stall 12, just like before, heart-pounding. The difference now was the caliber of competition. On either side of Rocky were champion dogs with flawless pedigrees, Storm among them, just a few boxes down. The track marshal raised the flag again. Jake positioned himself at the rail, trying to calm his breathing. He spotted Natalie in the stands, lips moving as though she were whispering encouragement from afar. A hush fell. Then, with the clang of metal gates, the dogs burst onto the track. Storm catapulted into an immediate lead, sleek muscles propelling her forward like a bullet. Another greyhound, almost pure white, matched her stride for stride. The rest of the pack scrambled for position, jostling on the rail. Rocky emerged somewhere in the middle, carefully skirting a tumbling dog that lost its footing. Dust rose in swirls, and the crowd roared. Jake shouted, "You've got this, Rock." Lap 1 of 2 was a melee of fur and speed. Storm and the white greyhound pulled ahead, forging a small gap. Rocky fought to keep close, weaving past a tired whippet, hugging the inside curve. By the second lap's midpoint, it became clear the front runners were unstoppable. Storm and the white greyhound were locked in a fierce duel, well ahead of the main pack. Jake's gaze flicked to the scoreboard, showing positions. 1, Storm, number 3. 2, the white greyhound, number 7. 3, a model hound, number 16. Rocky was in 5th, straining to gain ground. "Come on, you can pass one more dog." With the final turn looming, dogs began to tire. The mottled hound 16 slowed, losing steam. Rocky seized the moment, cutting inside and taking 4th place. Jake hooped, voice ragged. Storm barreled down the final stretch, neck and neck with the white greyhound, the crowd on its feet. Jake barely dared to breathe as Rocky sprinted behind them, chest heaving, doing everything he could to close the gap with the 3rd-place dog, a muscular Doberman mix, number 10. 20 yards from the line, Storm and the greyhound surged in unison. One final explosive burst that left the rest in their dust. Storm's muzzle crossed the finish line a hair's breadth ahead, the stands erupting into wild cheers. All eyes then darted to the fierce battle for 3rd. The Doberman mix pounded forward, while Rocky veered to the inside, muzzle drifting dangerously close to the dog's flank. For a split second, it seemed Rocky might overtake him, but the gap was too wide. They crossed the line almost simultaneously. Jake's throat burned from shouting. He vaulted the rail, sprinting onto the track. In a swirl of dust, he found Rocky panting heavily, side by side with the Doberman mix. An official rushed over, conferring with another who held a photo finish camera. By now, Trevor Brooks was already at the winner's circle, Storm at his side as cameras flashed. Jake tried to push aside the sting of envy. He knelt to offer Rocky water, murmuring soft praise. "You did amazing, buddy. Absolutely amazing." Natalie ran up, nearly tripping over the rail. "That was incredible." She wrapped Jake in a tight hug. He was as close to 3rd. They waited with bated breath as the officials uploaded the finish line photo to a screen. The final results rolled in. Storm 3, White Greyhound 7, Doberman Mix 10, Rocky 12. Jake felt a pang, but it was overshadowed by pride. 4th in the entire derby was more than they'd ever dreamed. He held Rocky's head in his hands, meeting the dog's exhausted yet triumphant gaze. "You did it," Jake whispered, tears burning the corners of his eyes. 4th place among the best in Texas. No one can ever call you a misfit again. Applause thundered around them as the top 3 dogs took their places on a makeshift podium. Cameras flashed, capturing Trevor's smug grin. But Jake and Natalie simply shared a look of absolute satisfaction. Maybe they didn't stand on that podium, but they'd come so far, proving that heart and determination could outweigh pedigree. Jake led Rocky away from the chaos, finding a quiet corner near the concession stands. The dog drank water greedily, tail wagging despite his exhaustion. "Jake," a voice called. They turned to see Trevor Brooks approaching, Storm trotting beside him. "Gotta hand it to you. You made it further than I expected." Jake stiffened, unsure if it was praise or condescension. Trevor sighed, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "Storm's the best dog I've ever trained, and you still gave us a run. I guess that dog of yours ain't as broken as I thought." Jake blinked, swallowing his pride. "Thanks," he said, voice level. "Rocky's got a lot of heart." Trevor nodded curtly, then patted Storm's flank. "You keep at it, kid. Maybe next year, you'll give us an even bigger challenge." With that, he strode off toward the podium. Natalie let out a laugh of disbelief. Was that his version of a compliment? Jake shrugged, a small grin forming. I'll take it. Turning back to Rocky, he gently scratched behind the dog's ear. Come on, buddy. Let's go celebrate with some well-deserved treats. As they made their way through the crowd, cheers and chatter buzzed around them. Jake couldn't stop smiling. They might not have taken first place, but they'd earned something more precious: respect, self-belief, and the undeniable proof that a short-legged, unwanted foxhound could stand shoulder to shoulder with the fastest dogs in Texas. And in Jake's mind, that victory felt every bit as sweet as a gold medal. 2 weeks after the Lone Star Dog Derby, the small town near Dallas was abuzz with whispers of Jake and Rocky's unexpected achievement. Neighbors who once peered from behind curtains now stopped by the yard to congratulate Jake, offering warm smiles and a pat on Rocky's head. Even Aunt Maggie couldn't hide her pride, occasionally telling customers at the local grocery store, "That's my nephew and his dog, 4th place in the biggest race in Texas." For Jake, life returned to a new kind of normal. He still woke at dawn to run with Rocky along the dirt roads. The difference was people didn't stare in disbelief anymore. They watched with admiration. Some of the local kids even asked if they could jog alongside them, hoping to learn from the underdog who almost stole the show in Austin. After chores and training, Jake often met Natalie under the old oak tree in the afternoons. With summer coming to a close, she'd soon return to high school classes, while Jake juggled farm work and online courses. But they promised each other that no matter how busy life got, they'd keep Rocky's training going, and maybe even aim for the Derby again next year. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake and Rocky sat on the porch. A gentle breeze rustled the fields, carrying the faint scent of hay. Rocky dozed with his head on Jake's knee, his ears occasionally twitching at distant cricket songs. "You know," Aunt Maggie said softly, stepping out with 2 glasses of lemonade, "you never told me what you planned to do next." Jake took a glass, the cool condensation trickling down his fingers. "Rocky and we have options. Mr. Jordan offered us a place on his farm again. Said he'd pay me to help train some of his younger pups. And Natalie's been talking about small regional races before next year's Derby, just to keep us sharp. It's exciting, but also kind of scary." Aunt Maggie set her gaze on the setting sun. "All change is scary, Jake, but you've proved you can handle more than most folks expected. I have a feeling you two will be just fine." Jake glanced down at Rocky, remembering the day he first saw him at the auction, trembling, overlooked, with a shorter leg that caused everyone to pass him by. In that moment, Jake saw a reflection of himself. Now, the dog who wasn't supposed to be worth a dime had raced against the best in Texas and shown everyone the power of heart over pedigree. "Yeah," Jake said, ruffling Rocky's fur. "I think so too." In the distance, the sky flared pink and orange, marking the end of another day. But for Jake and Rocky, it felt more like the beginning of something bigger. A future where underdogs could become champions, and where a boy and his dog could continue to defy the odds, one step at a time.